Tonight, I'm showing you how I built my farm table benches. I built these trestle benches for a friend who also wanted a matching farm table. They're made from solid cherry. The posts at either end of the bench were made by gluing two boards together and then squaring them up on the joiner and table saw. I then cut the tenons at both ends of each post. This was made much easier using my tenon jig, which is a design from Matthias Wandel. The edges were then cleaned up with a chisel. I also put a slight chamfer on the corners, which helps during the assembly later on. The top and bottom of the trestles were cut out and squared up. I then cut the mortises using a drill press and squared up the sides with a chisel. With a few taps, the test fit was a success. The classic trestle foot has a large radius on it, and I roughed that out with a bandsaw and then filed it smooth before a final sanding. The 45-degree supports are designed to lock in the top and bottom of the trestles so there's no loosening of the joints over time. These took some creativity, including coming up with a new table saw jig to cut the 45-degree parallel tenon shoulders. The rest of the material was removed with a bandsaw and my favorite dovetail saw. All of these surfaces were cut slightly large and then shaved down with a chisel. I realized after doing a couple mortises by hand that I would have to do 44 mortises on these benches, so I decided to get a mortiser. It made things go much quicker, and hey, it's awesome because it can drill square holes. I still had to cut the 45-degree side on the mortise by hand. Each bench has two spreaders, a large one in the center of the post and a smaller one on top. The tenons on these were also cut on the table saw, but were much larger because they need a large gluing surface. This locks in the side-to-side movement when someone's sitting on the bench. The top spreader has a dovetail at either end to make sure it stays locked in place even if the glue fails. After cutting the dovetail on either end of the spreader, I then transferred that to the trestle top and cut out the dovetail mortise. After doing a dry fit up of the entire base, I moved on to the bench top. These boards were cut perfectly square so I could later glue the edges together with biscuits. If your edges are perfectly square, the glue up is a piece of cake. Once the glue dried, I smoothed the surface with a hand plane to give it a more interesting texture. I also knocked down the corners with a chisel to make it look a bit rougher, but not enough to give splinters. I decided to stain all of the pieces separately because I knew that once it was assembled there would be some very tight areas that would be hard to get finish into. I used a General Finishes gel stain to give it a much darker look. For the final glue up of the trestles, I had to work fast because there are a lot of glued surfaces that have to be covered in glue and assembled before you can clamp it all together. The entire base was then glued together and clamped up before attaching it to the top. I attached the bench top using screws down the center and Z-clips on either end. This locks in the position down the center, but still allows for expansion across the width of the bench top. Finally, the top coat was Osmo Pollux oil. This is a hard wax oil that was originally designed for hardwood floors, but when it's cured it's very water resistant, so it's great for kitchen tables and benches. I really like how these benches turned out, and with a very robust design and using a hardwood like cherry, these things will last for a very long time. The next video is going to be the 9-foot long farm table that matches these benches. You're not going to want to miss that one, so make sure to hit subscribe below so you can see it when it comes out. See you next time.